Enroll your child for the manifested e-learning platform and see their grades grow tremendously. These videos can be downloaded to a laptop for offline viewing or viewed from a smartphone in a cost-friendly format.
Welcome to Manifested e-learning. Today we are going to have history and government lesson, and as we have been looking at the topic Introduction to History and Government, and specifically we have been looking at the sources of information to history and government. So a quick overview, my dear learner, of what we have learned in our previous lessons. We categorized the sources of information in history and government into three categories, right? Can you remember the three categories? Yes. We had three categories. We had the categories of sources, categories. We had three categories. Number one, unwritten sources. That is number one. And among the unwritten sources, we mentioned five unwritten sources. Can you remember the five unwritten sources? We had oral traditions. Then number two, what else did we have as our next source? We had linguistics. Number three, what else did we have? We had archaeology. And then we had, as number four, anthropology. And then lastly we had genetics. Right? So that was among the unwritten sources, and we said these are not recorded down, right? Yeah. And then number two, we looked at written sources. We looked at written sources. Which were the written sources? We looked at the earliest written sources. We mentioned the stone tablets. We mentioned the scrolls. We mentioned what else did we mention as an example of a written? We mentioned the scrolls, the stone tablets, and the parchments, right? And then we mentioned the modern. So here we talked of earliest forms of written sources, and then we had the modern written sources of information. Here we mentioned newspapers, we mentioned periodicals, we mentioned magazines, we mentioned books, right? All those are under modern methods of written sources. And then number three, the third category, which we are going to look at in our lesson today, we shall look at electronic sources. So that is what we are going to discuss in our lesson today. So having had an overview of what we have already done, so we come to today's objective. So what are we going to learn today? So by the end of the lesson today, my dear learner, I want you to be able to identify, right? Identify the electronic sources of information. That is the first objective. And then number two, you should be able to explain the advantages and disadvantages of what? Electronic sources of information. Of electronic sources of information. So let us look at the electronic sources of information. So that is number 3. Electronic sources of information. Remember, my dear learner, I do not want you to forget this. We talked of categories of information. We said the first one was unwritten sources. Note that very well. It is a category, not a source of information. It is a category of information or sources of information. And then number 2, we looked at the written sources of information as a category of sources of information. And then now we are looking at the electronic sources, right? So when you talk of electronic sources, they can be divided into 3. Electronic sources can be divided into 3. So they are divided or grouped into 3. They are grouped into 3. So number 1, or Roman 1, we shall look at audio sources, right? Audio, right? And then number 2, we shall talk of visual sources. And then number 3, we talk of audio visual sources. Audio visual sources. So electronic sources. When you talk of electronic, these are instruments, or it's a source that uses or is connected to an electrical source for it to function. So the first one, let us look at audio sources. Audio. That is Roman 1, audio. When you talk of audio, right? Audio. Audio has to do with sound. It has to do with sound. You can hear, right? You can hear. So audio sources are those sources that have been recorded electronically. Sound has been recorded electronically. You can hear somebody speaking, right? But you cannot see them. That is an audio source. Today, we are having electronic gadgets that can allow you to capture voice, right? It can allow you to capture sound, right? That is an audio source of information. For example, most of us, or of us, the younger generation, we were not able to find the former president who died, that is Mzee Moi, right? We did not see him, or we were not there when he was leading, right? But during the time or the period when he died, we could hear clips. We could hear audio clips. We could hear his words while he was still in power. How is that possible? So it is recorded in different forms, right? You could have cassettes, right? You could have radio, right? When those of us who have radio, you could hear somebody speaking. You can hear a caption of somebody speaking, right? But you cannot see them. That is an audio source. Yeah. So examples here, we can talk of radio. Radio. So you could hear somebody in a radio station speaking. You could hear they have invited a politician to the radio station. So that voice will be recorded. So even years to come, you can, if you go to that radio station, they will have clips of what has been happening. That is a record of what has happened. Nowadays, you have phones, right? You will find people going around recording people or recording voices of different things. So apart from radio, We have tape recorders. Tape recorders, right? Tape recorders. You record, right? Something as it happens, the voice, what you can hear. That is an audio source of information. Then, number 2, my dear learners, let us look at visual. Visual. So when you talk of visual source, right, this has to do with sight. This has to do with sight. You can record something that you are seeing, right? You can see things happening, right? So the most common here, you can talk of pictures. Pictures being taken. So for you to take a picture, you require a camera, you require a phone, right? That is an electronic gadget. So for you to take pictures, you need to have an electronic gadget for you to take a picture. So any kind of visual that you can see, right? You can see, or you can just record without voice, right? That is a visual source. And then number 3, we talk of audio visual. Audio visual. So this one is a mixture. A mixture of sound and picture. A mixture of sound and picture. So the best example here is like what we are having right now. You can hear me and you can see me, right? As we have the lesson. That is an audio visual. So if you record this lesson, right, from your laptop or from your phone, you download it. After you have downloaded it, you will have it in your phone or in your laptop, yeah, or in whatever form you are going to store it, right, in your flash disk, whatever form. You are going to hear some voice and you are going to see. So the best example there is what we refer to as a video, right? A video is a very good example of an visual or an audio visual. Or else we can also talk of television. Television. What you see on TV, you will see the politicians in parliament, for example, right? You will see them debating different issues, right? Right now, we are talking of floods, right? You can see how people's homes are being swept out. You could hear people talking how the houses have been swept out. So you can see the person and you can hear the voice of that person speaking. So that is an audio visual source. These are modern and they are the best because you can actually see, right, the activity as it happens and you can hear as the activity happens. So my dear learners, what are the advantages and the disadvantages of using electronic sources of information? So let us look at the advantages. Advantages, right? So the advantages, they are quite few. So number 1, we talk of it is fast. They are faster in spreading information. So if you want to get information, it is very easy for you. You just switch on your television set. You have information. So if you want to get what somebody said in some years to come or some years ago, you just need to go and get a source, or you can go to a radio station. You get what that person said. Number 2, information is easily stored. Information is easily stored. Information is easily stored. So you can capture events as they happen. Nowadays, we have whatever people are calling paparazzi, right? As an event is happening, everybody has a phone. So it is very easy to capture and store information. And then lastly, number 3, information can be transferred to long distance. Information is transferred. Information is transferred over long distance. Information is transferred over a long distance. It's very easy for you to know what happened in the US without you going to the US, right? It is very easy for you to know what is happening in Uganda without you traveling to Uganda physically. You just need to tap yourself to an electronic source. You have email, right? You have television. You could Google to get information. So information is easily transferred over a large distance. So let us look at the disadvantages as our last portion. Disadvantages. So the first disadvantage or limitation for an electronic gadget to function, it only functions where there is a source of power. So it is limited to where there is electricity. It is limited to where there is electricity. And then number 2, it requires technical know-how. Requires technical know-how. You cannot operate an electronic gadget without you having the knowledge of operating that gadget. And then it is subject to manipulation. So with modern technology, it's very easy to tamper with the original information. So you could have recorded something, but if somebody gets hold of that recording, they are able to distort or tamper with the recording as it happened, and they make it seamless. You cannot even notice. So those are some of the limitations. So my dear learner, you could go and find more advantages and disadvantages. So that is all about the sources of information to history and government. So just to have an overview of what we have been learning, we have looked at the categories. And I told you, I will repeat this again, my dear learner. We are talking of categories. So the sources of information can be categorized into 3. Unwritten sources, written sources, and electronic sources. So at no point should you, my dear learner, when you have been asked to give a source of information and you say unwritten source, that is not a source. That is a category of a source, right? Most of you, or most of learners make a mistake, pardon me. Most of the learners make that mistake. They are asked to give or mention a source of information, and then somebody answers an unwritten source. That is a category of a source and not a source. So you have to mention these sources that we have looked at. So as we come to the end of our lesson today, I want to give you a very short revision quiz, some questions that are going to help you revise for what we have looked at in our lesson today. So a revision question or revision questions. Number 1. Identify any 3 any three sources. Any three electronic sources. Any three electronic sources of information. That is one. And then number two, discuss the advantages and disadvantages of electronic sources of information. Discuss the advantages and disadvantages of electronic sources of information. So with that, if you are able to answer those questions, my dear learner, I'm sure you will be able to effectively tackle any problem or any question that you are asked concerning electronic sources of information. So with that, my dear learners, we have come to the end of our lesson today. Until next time, it's bye-bye.